All right, good evening. My name is Gabe Kearney. I'm the chair of the Sonoma County Young Democrats. I would like to welcome you to Petaluma, my great city, and welcome you to the second Congressional District Candidate Forum. This is the first forum in the race, and this will act as the Sonoma County Young Democrats interview process for our endorsement. We have prepared questions tonight for the candidates. They have not seen them yet, but we also have 3x5 cards right against the wall there. There's a stack of them on a table with pens. If you have a question that you feel is a burning question you want to ask, feel free to write it down on the card, and some of the Young Democrats will come through during the evening to collect those, and we'll ask a couple questions from the audience as well. Each candidate will be given 90 seconds for an opening and closing statement. Additionally, we will be giving every candidate 60 seconds to answer your question. In order to be fair and allow all the candidates a chance to speak, we ask that there be no crosstalk. However, if a candidate chooses to respond to another candidate's statement during their time, that is acceptable. The order of where the candidates are seated and who will answer question first was selected randomly using playing cards. And with that, we'll go ahead and dive in. So first question, or actually first intro is going to be with Stacey Lawson.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm Stacey Lawson, and I'm running to be your next Congresswoman here in the beautiful and diverse District 2. I want to start by saying that running for office is not something I thought would be part of my life plan. I've spent most of my life focused on a couple of key areas that have really been passions for me. The first is a deep and enduring passion for entrepreneurship and economic development. And the second is a commitment to helping people through education and social justice. And what has become clear to me is that our problems have become too entrenched for any one organization or even the market right now to solve. That we have systemic and policy issues that need to start from Washington, and Washington is not doing their job right now. We need new leadership in Washington to get us back on track. And I'm afraid that if we don't move in that direction, that many working class families will see the American dream start to fade before them. And those families were like my family. I actually grew up in a rural logging, fishing, and mill town that's very much like many of the towns that dot the north coast of our district. And while I didn't realize it at the time, we were working class poor. I lived in a trailer. My father was a truck driver, and there were times where there just wasn't enough work. And so he had to rely on things like unemployment and social benefits to put food on the table. So that social contract was what allowed me, raised in a trailer, to go on to put myself through public college, to graduate from Harvard Business School, to build successful companies, and to help many, many entrepreneurs do the same thing. And that's why I'm running for Congress. I'm the only candidate who has actually created thousands of jobs within the Northern California economy, and I'm running to put our workers back to work and to defend the social contract that has made us strong.
All right, thank you, Stacey. Tiffany Renee.
Thank you to the Sonoma County Young Democrats for hosting tonight's forum. I come from a family with a long history of public and community service. From an early age, my parents and grandparents instilled the values of hard work and civic engagement. The struggles I have faced in my own life drive me to create better opportunities for others to have healthier, happier, and more just lives. Washington is broken, Sacramento is broken. Too many politicians are taking hardline positions on revenues versus expenditures without understanding the realities of the average American. I grew up in a very diverse family where I learned to work with people despite our differences. As the first Latina elected to Petaluma City Council, and through my experiences serving on numerous boards and committees, I have been able to put my experience to work in challenging situations. Having worked within my community, I see the people coming together to help one another even when they are faced with the greatest challenges of their lives. Americans are innovative, creative, and resilient. We need leadership that connects people to that spirit. I've overcome some extraordinary challenges in my life, and I believe that this experience, along with being in government during the toughest economy since the Great Depression, has given me the resilience, wherewithal, and smarts to get America working again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Now, Jared Huffman.
Thank you, Gabe, and thank you to the Young Democrats for hosting this forum. Thanks also to my fellow candidates for stepping forward and being part of this important election process. So I'm Jared Huffman, and for the past 5 years I have represented the North Bay in the State Assembly. Prior to that, I was a senior attorney for an environmental group called NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. and I also spent 12 years in local government. I'm running for Congress because I have spent my whole career working in the public interest and getting things done, not just talking about issues. In fact, for the last 5 years in Sacramento, I have overcome a fair amount of partisan gridlock to pass more than 50 pieces of successful legislation. I'm happy to say we added to that tally today. I got some great news that Governor Brown just signed my AB 42, which is a very important bill to help keep our state parks open. The next member of Congress to represent the 2nd District is going to have a huge job with huge challenges, especially with this toxic tone that we see in Washington, D.C. these days. So I think it's important that we certainly elect someone with the right skill set, with the right values, but also very important that we elect someone with a demonstrated record of confronting partisan paralysis and getting things done. Because we need results on things like job creation, energy independence, ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, education, and promoting sensible deficit reduction. Those are the things that I intend to do with your support as your next member of Congress. Thanks for the chance to be here.
Thank you, Jared. Now, Norman Solomon.
Thanks to everybody who's made it possible for us to gather here. I want to be clear at the outset. I believe in government of, by, and for the people, not government of, by, and for corporations. We're facing a crisis in our country, going from our public schools to the lack of jobs to the reality that our environment is being degraded. While there are record profits on Wall Street, people are struggling to get by. Massive unemployment that's chronic and getting worse. Last night, I was in Washington, D.C., at an event hosted by Progressive Democrats of America, which has endorsed me for Congress in this race. And I heard co-chair of Healthcare Not Warfare campaign, a fellow co-chair, John Conyers, talk about the need to bring to Congress people who will fight for working people, who will fight against corporate power and against the warfare state. We also heard Lynn Woolsey speak there. As you know, she has been a voice from this district for nearly 2 full decades, an extraordinary voice, not willing to compromise, not willing to again and again tone down the voice because those in power would prefer her to do so. I'm the closest to her in terms of politics. I want to represent this district in that spirit. Let me close by saying that there's a myth that you can choose between corporate donations or winning an election. We in our campaign have refused to take a single penny of corporate PAC money. That distinguishes us and our campaign. We are going to proceed to represent people rather than Wall Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Now, Susan Adams.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonoma County Young Democrats, for hosting us. Thank you for all of you for turning out on a weekday evening to listen to us. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And what you need to know about me and what the lens is that I will bring to this discussion is that I've been a nurse for 33 years. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm an educator, a professor of nursing, and the values that I bring are wrapped up in my past 33 years in my professional life, and in the last 9 years as a county supervisor. I currently serve as the president of the Marin County Board of Supervisors. I'm a descendant, 4th-generation descendant of a Mendocino ranching family. I have the deepest roots in this community of any of the candidates and a deep passion for the people and the issues of this community. Each of the candidates will bring their own lens, and you won't hear too many differences in our opposition to the war, in creating jobs, and in public office we've created many jobs as well. Public jobs, but they're good jobs too. I am not afraid to fight the tough battles. I am working at the local government, and too often Washington and Sacramento politicians have forgotten about the people at the local level. We're dealing day to day with the decisions that have been made in Sacramento and Washington and the impacts of those decisions on us at the local level. Issues like public education, health care, our parks. And so I look forward to having the conversation and answering the questions tonight.
Thank you, Susan. Now to our first question of the night. Tiffany will be the first person to answer the question. So Tiffany, you have just been sworn in as the Congress member representing the 2nd Congressional District. What is the first bill that you will put forth?
Thank you. Let's see. think one of the things that we need to deal with right away is creating economic stimulus. And one of the ways that we could do this is by lowering monthly payments on student loan debt. Older loans have a maximum interest rate of 8.8 to 9% when consolidated, and currently consolidated loans are much lower, like 3.5 to 4% for the loan lifetime. But these loan rates are not available to those holding older loan consolidations. The average American household with $100,000 of student loan debt at an 8.5% interest rate could save about $300 a month by lowering their interest rate to 3.5%. I would introduce a bill to allow consolidated student loans to be automatically refinanced under the direct loan program to the historically low rates and open applications for refinancing of loans held outside of the federal district consolidation loan program. Refinancing of student loan debt of older consolidated loans could save households thousands of dollars a year in interest, and this is real money that would be better spent on goods and services within our communities.
Thank you, Tiffany. Jared?
This is a unique district, of course, over 500 miles of coastline, one of the most amazing and iconic coastal districts you'll find anywhere in the United States. And so for that reason, is my button on, Gabe? Is it? Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. How about that? Thank you so much. So for that reason, I think my first piece of legislation, if Lynn Woolsey is unable to get it over the finish line in the coming year, is continuing her work on the National Marine Sanctuary. I think that's very important, and I've certainly been ready to pledge to her and others to continue that work. I'm certainly not going to stop there, though. We need federal reforms to enable Sonoma County's Energy Independence Program to go forward, to allow Fannie and Freddie to see the light on these property-assessed financing mechanisms that are creating jobs and helping us solve environmental problems. We need to end the penalty under the Federal Social Security Act for California teachers who, after serving in a federal job, decide to work for the state of California and our pension system and are penalized in their retirement. That needs to go. And I don't have enough time in what you have allotted, but believe me, I'm going to be a very busy legislator.
Thank you. Norman, your turn now.
Great. Thank you. Well, I'm going to push for legislation to cut military spending drastically and use it to create jobs and also fund our woefully underfunded public schools. And parenthetically, I've been searching for any indication that any of the candidates other than myself were working against and denouncing the tripling of the troop force in Afghanistan during 2009 and 2010. I went to Kabul and worked to end that escalation. Also, I'm co-chair, as I mentioned, of the Healthcare Not Warfare campaign. And John Conyers, the other co-chair, has introduced the 21st Century Humphrey Hawkins Full Employment Job Training Act, which commits this government, the federal government, to full employment and also imposes a 1/4% transaction tax on Wall Street, which will yield $150 billion with a B dollars every year to create jobs and train people for them. And I would fight very hard to get that bill through.
Thank you, Norman. Susan?
Thank you. I agree that one of the first things we need to do is end this devastating war. I have a brother that has served 7 tours overseas in the Middle East. We're going to have 2 million veterans that are coming home to us that are going to be our next wave of homeless. We also, I think, need to focus some attention on implementing the bills that have already been passed. We have a health care reform bill that's been passed by 2014. We're going to have 30 million more people coming into our local communities to try to get health care, and we don't have the capacity at this time. I've been a single-payer health care proponent since before any other politician even knew what that was in my work as a health care provider, and health care reform is going to be one of the things that's at the top of my agenda. But energy, clean energy efficiencies and creating jobs through clean energy programs is also important. Marin County was the very first community choice aggregator to deliver green energy, clean green energy in the state of California.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy?
Thank you, Gabe. So California has been incredibly hard hit by unemployment. We have the second highest unemployment rate in the country. And if you look at our very diverse district, we span from 8.3% unemployment here or in the south in Marin, all the way up to 17+% in Trinity County in the north. It's a very, very big deal. And so for me, I think jobs and reducing unemployment and getting the economy going has got to be job one. There was actually the front page of The Economist today shows a picture of a big black hole, and it says, "Until politicians actually do something about the global economy, be afraid." I think that the impetus is really, really, really clear. This has to be number one. And so the actions that I think we need to take are firstfold, some demand stimulus. I think that the current jobs plan is good, but too little and perhaps too late. We need to get moving quickly, and it should be increased. So investing in infrastructure, roads, airports, ports, buildings, public buildings, schools, et cetera, is going to be really key. The second is structural reforms. We need our banking system to be healthy and robust. And third is focus on small business and made in America and reinvigorating our local economy so that we can put people back to work.
Thank you, Stacy. All right, Jared, you get to answer the next question, but before that, I'll remind everyone that there are 3x5 cards on the table right where that wonderful young lady sitting in the back. There's pens. If you have any other questions you'd like to ask, please feel free to write them down on that and turn them in. Jared, this next question is for you. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was signed into law by President Obama on March 23, 2010. Do you think this bill went far enough, or would you have made more comprehensive changes to healthcare delivery in America?
Do I think the bill went far enough? No. I, like probably many of the candidates in this race, would like to see our country move towards universal single-payer health insurance. And in fact, that's, again, more than just a campaign position for me. I have actually co-authored legislation to do just that in the state level each of the last 5 years. But I don't want to minimize the achievement that we did reach with the Affordable Care Act, because it is a big, big deal to get 95% of the American people under the umbrella of coverage. It's one of the most important things that we can do to begin to bend the curve of skyrocketing health care costs. Do we stop there? Absolutely not, but I will defend it against the Republican attacks. I will not join those who have called for the Supreme Court to overturn it. I think we need to build on it. Already, this act has provided important protections for Americans, including young people. Of some concern to young Democrats, Gabe, might be the fact that people up to the age 26 can now be on their parents' plan. We're beginning to see changes such as pre-existing conditions no longer being a reason to deny health care coverage. So it's a great start. We need to build on it, but we need to go much, much further.
Thank you, Jared. Norman?
Yeah, there's some pluses from this new law. There are also some real negatives. It keeps the pharmaceutical, hospital, and insurance industries at the center of health care in this country. We've seen the result. H.R. 676, John Conyers' bill for single payer, is something that, as co-chair with him and Donna Smith, who you saw in SICO from the California Nurses Association, we've been fighting for now for several years. I was on the picket line at Novato Community Hospital about a week ago, where the results of these predatory corporations are being felt by workers and by patients. And the solidarity with nurses and others who are fighting not only for themselves, not only for decent working conditions. Can you imagine you're a nurse, you're a staff nurse, and you're having trouble to get health care for yourself because of the takeaways from this corporation, in this case Sutter Health, which has been able to pressurize not only working people, but also those who are patients. So as long as we have these huge corporations at the center of healthcare where their job is to deny us healthcare, it's totally insufficient. We need to fight back in Congress.
Thank you, Norman. Susan?
Of course, it didn't go far enough, and it was about 2,700 pages of documents for about 3 pages worth of good policy, including the ability for people to stay on their parents' care if they are 26. You can't lose your health care because you actually have to use it, and hopefully won't go bankrupt, which is the #1 reason for bankruptcy in this country, is a medical problem. And just because you have insurance doesn't mean that you have access to health care. care. It's a problem that we are experiencing in our own communities right now. In Marin County, we built a health and wellness campus that provides health care for anybody who is without a medical home, so whether you have insurance or not. Fortunately, through the National Association of Counties, where I serve in a leadership position, I was able to help to craft policies for our 3,000 plus counties across the country that the Obama administration used to try to start setting the stage, but we need to take the incremental steps to get us to a single payer system.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy.
Agreed. I think we made some good gains, but we need to go further. My grandmother was a nurse, and my mother is a public health worker. She actually runs the public health officers of the state of California. So healthcare is something that's very, very near and dear to my heart and a very big deal for my family. I think the Affordable Care Act made good strides in that we now have 95% coverage. We have 32 million more Americans who are covered under this act than were before. We've managed to stem some of the abuses of the insurance companies and provide coverage in this district to over 50,000 more folks that were not insured. I think that it was a big disappointment that the public option didn't go through. That would have provided 12 million more Americans living at or near the poverty level with greater care and greater coverage. But even that would not have been enough. I think moving towards a single-payer model is absolutely critical to ensure both quality of care and that we don't leave anyone behind. So I think that that's the direction we need to move in and something that's a key priority going forward in Congress.
Thank you very much. Tiffany, your response?
Thank you. This bill certainly did not cover the needs of the single-payer provision. That was a battle that must be continued. The good things about this bill are the health care for young people under 26. It's something that my own daughter has been able to appreciate. As well, I've heard great excitement around no copay for contraceptive prescriptions. And I'm pro-child, pro-family, and pro-choice, and healthcare considerations, not politics, should drive health coverage decisions when it comes to abortion. Women must be allowed to hear honest and complete health information from their doctors. This bill has been used as a way to put walls between women and their doctors. The right and safe access to an abortion is an economic issue for women, especially young women. The current war on women is being waged in economic policies that affect access to programs like food and other aid for pregnant women, mothers, babies, and kids. The Stupak on Steroids agenda would force people to pay higher taxes if their private insurance plan includes abortion coverage, and bills like H.R. 358 make it impossible for insurance companies to participate in the new healthcare system. Congress' war on women must stop, and as your next Congresswoman, I have the guts and the stamina to stand up against these attacks on women's rights.
Thank you, Tiffany. Now for the next question, we'll start with Norman. Norman, what is your opinion of net neutrality? Should service providers be allowed to throttle or restrict access to one type of content over another? Does the FCC have the authority to determine and enforce this?
Well, I've been a media activist for several decades, co-founder of the media watch group FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. Corporate domination of our airwaves and more and more the internet is absolutely unacceptable, and Congress has a responsibility to enforce antitrust regulations and impose new laws that will maintain and in some cases reestablish what we call net neutrality. It's absolutely essential that, again, in this realm, corporate power be rolled back. The body politic has a necessity for the free circulation of ideas and information and debate. And corporate power has served as blockage of the body politic. In the internet realm, we've seen so many strides of civic engagement, but those strides are under threat now because of these huge corporations, now just 5 controlling most of the news and information flow of the country through ownership, down from 50 just a couple of decades ago, 3 decades ago. It's our responsibility in Congress to move aggressively, assertively, and democratically, lowercase d, to block this further effort of corporations to dominate the internet. And net neutrality is just that everybody is on the same level and same level playing field, and that's essential for democratic discourse.
Thank you, Norman. Susan?
As the past vice chair of the Marin Telecommunications Agency, I went to battle with Comcast to ensure that we actually were able to get our franchise dollars to have our public media center. Our public media centers are our public town squares. They're the place where we get to vet ideas and have all ideas open for debate and discussion. And I think when you are able to have the freedom to have those types of debates, you create better policy. I think that the net neutrality is going to be important, but there's more to it than just net neutrality. The companies also control how fast you get your bytes through your fiber. We have issues with rural telecommunications, and how do we help to get access to our more distant communities, and that's an issue that they're working on in the north part of this new congressional district now. So I think it's important for us to be able to have an opportunity to have our public square through the internet media.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy.
So I absolutely agree that net neutrality is a key issue for Congress, and that our media is what flavors our public discourse and informs our citizens, and making sure that corporate interests are not unduly influencing that is very, very important. I think the FCC as a governing body is prepared to take that charge, but also needs to be given the right kind of direction and guidelines by Congress. We also need to make sure that, not just on the net neutrality side, but in general, that our digital infrastructure is sort of invested in as much as our physical infrastructure in order to compete and be innovative in the future economy. So as was mentioned here, part of our North Coast District actually has one broadband line that runs up through Humboldt County. One broadband line serves all of the county, and when it goes down, the hospital doesn't have internet and the police force doesn't have internet. So there are some key infrastructure things we need to be investing in from a digital perspective, as well as the policy and governing issues around net neutrality and other digital rights and ownership that Congress should be taking care of.
Thank you, Stacy. Tiffany, your view on this?
Thank you. As a web designer and developer, I understand the necessity for clear access to the internet. It's been my livelihood for the past 10 years. This issue is more than how much bandwidth. It is also about how much we pay for the access. And people that cannot pay will see the throttling. Under net neutrality, we need to focus on the infrastructure issues and providing larger bandwidth for rural America. They are facing the low bandwidth that we thought we had 10 years ago. It's very, very sad. And this issue affects those who cannot pay the most, and people that are looking for jobs, that are trying to have home-based businesses, will be affected by the access to bandwidth. And paying for internet by byte is completely unacceptable and is backwards in terms of what it was created for, in creating access to information and building democracy.
Thank you, Tiffany. Jared, your view on this?
Thank you, Gabe. I certainly support a strong federal policy to ensure net neutrality. But I want to just draw one distinction, and that is I've actually had a chance to work on these issues the last 5 years. I have sat on the Utilities and Commerce Committee of the State Assembly. That is where all of these issues involving telecommunications are heard. They are tough issues. They involve competition. They involve consumer protection. They involve privacy and so many other things. And I'm very proud that throughout that 5-year run on that committee, I have maintained a 100% pro-consumer scorecard rating from the Consumer Federation of California. So again, these are not just campaign positions for me. These are things I've actually had a chance to work on and produce some results. The last thing I want to do is underscore, though, the importance of rural broadband. Without rural broadband, just about every aspect of this rural North Coast district is going to be affected. And the flip side of that is the opportunity to dramatically expand access to broadband to every single home on the North Coast, and eventually, hopefully, to every part of rural America, is going to not only create jobs, but provide better education, health care, and quality of life.
Thank you, Jared. Susan, you get to start off with this next question, and it's our first audience question.
Oh, boy.
And it comes from Kevin Jones right here in Petaluma. And no, if you live in Petaluma, you don't get preference on questions. But it helps. The President's view on marriage equality is ever evolving. What is yours? And what important changes would you support for your gay, lesbian, and bisexual and transgendered constituents?
Well, I am so glad you asked this question as the parent of a lesbian daughter who was taking the benefit of being able to get married for a brief window of time here in California. I am a fall-on-your-sword supporter of equal rights. I don't care who somebody loves and who somebody wants to share their life with. Under the constitutional law, it's not a religious thing. It's about being able to have survivor benefits and share Social Security and the other things that we give to our heterosexual couples who decide to marry. Until we have a country where all people are valued, where everybody is given the same rights, responsibilities, and also challenges, then we are not truly living in a democratic society. And I have supported the legislation that's come out. We've sent from our Board of Supervisors the letters of support, and definitely support equal marriage rights.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy, your opinion?
Thank you for the question. So I would just like to say that all my positions start first from the very fundamental perspective that we are all interconnected and that everyone deserves fair treatment under the law, regardless of their race, their gender, their orientation, any distinction that we could say, that equal treatment under the law should be first and foremost in our minds. I am absolutely supportive of equal marriage rights. The fact that we're still fighting some of these basic equal rights issues, I think, is a travesty in our country. That being said, moving forward with the Equal Rights Amendment, making sure women have choice, making sure we have equality in marriage rights, all of those are key issues for the campaign and ones that I unequivocally support.
Thank you, Stacy. Tiffany?
Thank you. Marriage equality is one of the last places that this country needs to look to address our human rights policy. This is a human rights issue, it's an equality issue, and it's a very personal issue. Marriage equality is something that Americans are facing deep struggles around our value system, and I believe that when we can approach the issue around the concerns, the quality of care, the issues that people have to face when they're caring for their loved ones at the end of their life, those personal issues, I think, are places where we can really address this issue on a national level. I have fought very strongly for marriage equality. I have been very proud of the friends and family that have been able to marry in the times here in California, and it's something that I hope to see someday in my lifetime, and that I will continue to work towards at the federal level.
Thank you, Tiffany. Jared?
Thank you. One of the first things I did as a member of the State Assembly was approach my friend and colleague, Senator Mark Leno, who was an Assembly member at the time, and sign on as a co-author of his marriage equality bill. I supported it that year. I have supported not only marriage equality consistently since that time, but also any number of other bills to ensure that the LGBT community has not only equal rights but equal treatment in California. On Monday mornings at 8 a.m., I teach constitutional law at Dominican University in San Rafael. You're all welcome to come on out at 8 a.m. next Monday if you like. But it's very clear to me as an attorney, as somebody that's looked pretty closely at the Constitution, that discriminating in this legal institution that is part of our laws on the basis of gender is not something that can be defended under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So I don't think legally it's a particularly close call. I do think people in their own religious sacraments can define marriage however they want. But when it comes to the laws of the United States and the state of California, I think the Constitution requires equality.
Thank you. Now, Norman?
This is a human rights issue, and while we focus on the need for total equality for LGBT people everywhere in terms of marriage, we need to keep in mind that there's enormous realms of discrimination in other aspects of life. Housing, school, employment. This is chronic, and often it's very insidious, and we need to have not only laws on the books, but enforcement capacities and enthusiasm coming from the federal government. This is, again, as in many realms, where we from the North Bay and this district have the opportunity to push the White House. You know, there's this blight on federal law, the so-called Defense of Marriage Act. We have so much to overcome. My first picket line I went on at age 14 was to desegregate an apartment complex in 1966 when I was 14 years old. That was a human rights struggle. All aspects of LGBT rights are human rights struggles as well, and we need to fight for them on that basis.
Thank you, Norman. So, Stacy, you get this next question, and it is a pre-written one. What committee assignments will you seek if elected to the House of Representatives, and why those committees?
So my primary issues around the economy and jobs. So committees related to commerce and to economic development are the ones that I would be most suited for. I think the issues here are, again, making sure that we're having we put forward a really, really strong jobs plan, that we have committed investment and stimulus for demand. We have an economy here with 70% consumer spending, and where 30% of our export trade is probably going to be flat given the current global economy. And right now, if people aren't spending, there's no demand, and folks aren't creating, companies won't be creating jobs. So our number one job is to get the economy going. It's to invest in infrastructure development, in investing in small business, giving access to small business credit, incentives to put the long-term unemployed back to work, investments in innovation, and making sure that we're spawning new sectors like clean technology and the clean economy in order to make sure we're continuing to drive commerce, the economy, and jobs.
Thank you, Stacy. Tiffany?
Thank you. I would most like to serve on the Space and Technology Committee. I believe that being able to meet the needs of this district means being on that tech committee. I've been serving on the Technology Committee here in the city of Petaluma. I helped co-found this committee, and it's been an important role in defining our economic development strategy for the city of Petaluma. The technology sector in the North Bay is a growing and thriving sector of our economy, and it needs to have the strong and knowledgeable person who is able to focus on those needs of this district to fight and protect the needs that we're striving for on that committee.
Thank you, Tiffany. Jared?
Thank you, Gabe. I went into the State Assembly with a pretty clear idea which committees I wanted and which one I wanted to chair, Water, Parks, and Wildlife, and I worked toward that, and in fact have for the past 4 years chaired that committee. Going into Congress, if I'm fortunate enough to get there, my highest wish would be to serve on the Natural Resources Committee. I know Ed Markey, the current chair of the, current ranking member, hopefully the chair soon when we take back the House. And he's been in Congress a long time. I look forward to serving with him, and my aspiration would be eventually to hold the gavel in that committee in the legacy of folks like Mo Udall and others who have served us so well.
Thank you very much. Norman?
Yeah, there are a number of committees that overlap on issues of labor and the possibility of creating full employment. Likewise, energy, I think, is a tremendously important focus, and particularly to bring to the committees the relevance of being willing to challenge corporate power, because so much of what's possible in terms of green energy requires that we go up against those who have often given big campaign contributions. So total independence from the energy conglomerates, a clean record of having never taken any money from those energy conglomerates is very important to be able to function in the Congress at the committee level and on the floor in a truly independent way, so you can go really deep green. You can't be really deep green unless you're willing to fight corporate power. That is a reality. For instance, the so-called cap and trade. If you like derivatives, you'll love cap and trade. Wall Street adores this whole scenario. I'm for cap and dividend, the Cantwell-Collins bill, taxing carbon at its source. Corporate America doesn't want it. We've got to get it done.
Thank you, Norman. Susan?
Well, I have a feeling as an incoming freshman, I wouldn't be given a whole lot of choice about being a ranking member of any committee. I think probably the leader of the party would assign me, but I think having a doctorate in nursing and being a women's health nurse practitioner, having a specialty with women who are dealing with addiction and recovery during pregnancy and motherhood would probably line me up very well with the health committees. And everything that we would be working on would be with a health lens. You can't build the infrastructures and communities that we need to live healthier lives without looking at land use issues. Clean water, clean air, those are health issues. If we don't have healthy air, we have kids with asthma. Clean energy, clean air. All of those things are interconnected. And in Marin, I was able to start a therapeutic justice program that diverted 85% of our 200 severely mentally ill people out of jail. They are not recidivists any longer, and they're stably employed.
Thank you, Susan. Tiffany, you will get to start with this next question. In a few weeks, the UN Security Council will be discussing whether or not the prospective Palestinian state fulfills the UN Charter's requirements. Do you support Palestinian statehood? If yes, why? If no, why not?
I believe that the issues in the Middle East are very complex. I do think that having work around the Palestinian state is something that, as a goal, is probably a good one, but we're not there yet, and we need to address more of the issues around the region before we can achieve the peace between Israel and Palestine. I do think that there are a lot of strong issues and energies around this topic, and until we're able to really focus on creating a peaceful state of providing the health and welfare of all of the folks that are over in the Middle East, in Israel and Palestine, we're not going to achieve decent, peaceful talks between the two areas and the two regions.
Thank you, Tiffany. Jared?
I oppose the Palestinian process through the UN. I absolutely support a Palestinian state, but I support it as part of a two-state solution that is achieved through bilateral negotiations. And unfortunately, the Palestinian maneuver at the UN right now is an end run around negotiations. We need to put an end to it. I support President Obama's position that he will veto it. That's the right thing to do. And then the United States needs to push both sides to get back to the negotiating table. We know the framework for peace. It's been on the table now for almost 2 decades. We know the issues. The United States has a very important leadership role to convene, be part of convening negotiations, which are far more important. It's the only way we're going to get there, and not unilateral actions in the UN.
Thank you, Jared. Norman?
Yeah, I'm the only candidate with any meaningful experience in terms of foreign policy. I've been to the region many times over the decades. I've looked into the eyes of Israeli children and Arab children. They all are equally precious. We need a foreign policy based on a single standard of human rights. We don't need members of Congress who will simply blow with the wind and worry about who's going to get mad at them if they fight for a single standard of human rights. This is one of many issues that we've posted on our website, and I'd invite you to visit to look at the Issues tab, solomonforcongress.com. In terms of the Middle East, the United States has not always been what's called an honest broker. We need to be an honest broker. That assures that the United States will earn the respect of Israelis and Palestinians. I've been at negotiating meetings in Baghdad where U.S. officials and Iraqi officials have tried to figure out how to avoid bloodshed. We have to figure out how to get beyond the cycles of violence.
Thank you, Norman. Susan?
This is an incredibly complex issue, thousands of years of challenges in this part of the world. And I think that we have seen some failed diplomatic efforts in this area. We have sometimes forgotten how to allow people the opportunity to determine for themselves how they want to run their own countries and not impose American-style democracy or ideology on independent sovereign nations. With that said, I think there is a role to be played by the United States to help facilitate. And as was stated before by other members of this panel tonight, there have been plans on the table. There is a guiding pathway to get there. We need to have the political will and try to use whatever strategies we can to try to bring this to a fruitful closure. But as we saw with the use of the internet activities that triggered Egypt and Libya, things might happen all on their own in other ways.
Thank you. Now, Stacy.
I think what we all probably feel in our hearts is that we really long for safe, secure, happy peoples on both sides of this issue. And when I've traveled in the Middle East and I talk to folks on both sides, I hear both the despair and the frustration and the hope that one day peace will be achieved. Israel is an incredibly important partner for the U.S. They're a strong democracy in a very tumultuous region, and we need to continue to support that democratic presence there. It's very, very critical for us. That being said, we need both sides to be peaceful and to be free and to be happy. The ultimate goal here is indeed and must be a two-state solution. Israel as the Jewish state and the homeland for the Jewish people, and as the state of Palestine as the homeland of the Palestinian people. And the question is really, how do we get there? And I think we have to get there through encouraging negotiation on both sides. It has to be a bilateral agreement. It has to be mutually agreed upon borders with mutually agreed upon land swaps, and it must be something that is recognized on both sides in order for there to be long-term security and peace.
Thank you, Stacy. Jared, you'll get this next question to start. What or who do you see as the greatest threat to our national security here in America?
That's a great question. I can tell you that the real threat to our national security is not the threat that we are currently mobilized to face, because unfortunately, we still have this massive, globally forward deployed military left over from a Cold War that's been over for decades. So I think one thing that we absolutely have to do as we recalibrate our actual security threats and our actual security needs in the modern age is fundamentally reconsider this forward deployment. It will provide major cost savings that are going to help us address many of the other challenges that I know we're going to be talking tonight. Obviously, terrorism is one threat, but perhaps the greatest threat is poverty and the challenges that we're going to see through climate change. These are not threats that you can militarily mobilize your way out of. You're going to need smarter strategies going forward.
Very much. Norman.
Yeah, we have tremendous threats that we face in terms of the deterioration of our own society, infrastructure, education, healthcare, housing, massive chronic unemployment. Those are the real threats to our well-being. And frankly, a lot of the threat in Washington is well-meaning people who keep their mouths shut when the head of the party is in the White House and pursues policies that are injurious to the well-being of the future of our country. I take a page from what Paul Wellstone, who, by the way, in the U.S. Senate, got there never having held elective office. Wellstone got to the U.S. Senate and said he was going to fight for the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. As we see our society, day by day, year by year, suffering more and more from the neglect and turning over our futures to the untender mercies of these massive corporations with undemocratic power over politicians, our real threats are the corrosion of our own society. And we need to be willing and able to fight for jobs, for education, for housing, to speak clearly and not back down.
Thank you, Norman. Susan?
While some might think the biggest threat to us is terrorists from overseas, I just want to remind everybody that we have our own homegrown terrorists right here in this country. Oklahoma City was an example of that. We have gangs that are shooting each other in our neighborhoods. We have a healthcare system that will not be ready to respond should we have either a bioterrorist event or whether we have a pandemic flu event. We have poverty that's reaching a place where 25% of our children are going to bed hungry in this country. We have a lot of issues that we need to address here, and in some ways, perhaps our biggest threat to our country is our own selves. And until we start feeling that sense of community again and working together and getting away from the divisive politics that we've been seeing and start getting back to a place where we can solve the problems of the American people, we are capable of solving any of these problems, no matter how big or how small. So I think that we have a lot of work ahead to be able to begin the dialogue again and begin to solve problems together as community.
Thank you, Susan. Stacy?
I think we actually have two major threats, and I may not have time in a minute to go into them both, but one that I think is very, very important is the increasing disparity of wealth between the rich and the poor, that we have over the last 30 years of declining real wages actually put more in the hands of the top 1%, which take home now 30% of total income every year, that our middle and working class simply don't have enough purchasing power, and they don't have the standard of living, and they're seeing the American dream slip away from them. This actually undermines our social fabric in such a real way that is not being talked about yet, that it is a tremendous threat to the fabric of our society, and something I think is absolutely essential for us to address at both an economic level and a social justice level. The other issue I find is around energy independence. We have a major addiction to foreign oil that causes a whole bunch of unfortunate ramifications in our foreign policy, and we are not yet taking the steps we need to take in investing in clean sources of fuel, alternative energy sources, and renewables in order to thrive and be innovative and competitive in the global economy going forward.
Thank you, Stacy. Tiffany?
Thank you. The history of our military involvement over the last several decades has created the insecurity that our country currently faces. Involving ourselves in military occupations throughout the world, we've seen has created terrorists that want to come and terrorize us here in the United States. But the true national security threat is not the military involvement that we have been involved in. It's the lack of education and the access to education that we're currently creating. We're seeing huge drops in high school diploma achievement, and in going on to college. We're seeing dramatically high rates of unemployment in people who have not received a high school diploma. This lack of education and lack of opportunity is the greatest threat to our country at the moment, and we've got to be able to provide that education, the college education as well, for our growing country.
Thank you. So, Norman, you get this next one. It's going to be a rapid-fire question. I don't think you'll need much time to answer it. What is your opinion on capital punishment?
I'm opposed to capital punishment. I've been out in front of San Quentin when the hand has gone to midnight and the state has taken a life. I've always been opposed in all situations.
Thank you. Susan?
I am opposed to capital punishment. First of all, fiscally, it costs a lot more money to have people sitting on death row for 20 or 30 years before they die of natural causes. And secondly, the jails and the prisons are filled with people that have gotten themselves in there because of either a mental illness or a substance abuse problem. And as we start redirecting more prevention, early detection, and intervention on the front end to help get the people the support that they need so they don't end up in prison, and we provide early education, preschool education, I think we will be seeing less people in jails. And in our county, we actually have empty jail beds because of our therapeutic justice program that we've implemented.
Thank you, Stacy.
I'm absolutely opposed to capital punishment. I'm also very compassionate and understand, the victims and their families, how retribution may be something that people want, but in terms of living in a free society and one that upholds the highest justice, that capital punishment cannot be part of our penal code.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you. As someone who's been a victim of violence, having lost my father at 16 to a tragic murder, you would expect someone like myself to be for capital punishment. And in fact, I'm very against it. I have been my entire life. I believe it's something that goes against the human spirit and the ability for people to change themselves. It costs us too much money and too much time, and it does not bring the justice that people are truly seeking. And so I'm against capital punishment.
Thank you, Jared.
I oppose capital punishment not only under 8th Amendment cruel and unusual punishment grounds constitutionally, but also because it's a manifest failure when it is considered against all of the various rationales that are usually offered in support of it. One of the reasons it's a huge manifest failure is the tremendous cost of capital punishment. So I have not only opposed this in the abstract, this is another one of those cases where I've had a chance to put my values into action, and over the last 5 years I have fought hard to prevent the state from investing $1.6 billion additional dollars in a new death row at San Quentin. I have actually fought and stopped that death row expansion project in the past year. So a very firm and well-documented record on this issue, Gabe.
Thank you. Susan, you'll get the next question. If elected to Congress, would you work, this is an audience question from Mr. Cordum. Would you work to provide a way for federal transportation funding to become available to further the SMART project?
Yes, I think that that's the place where the funding should come from. Unfortunately, our suburban rural train system doesn't reach the highest category for funding opportunities when it's in competition with some of the other urban areas. But it certainly is an area that deserves federal funding. One of the challenges with SMART, and we're seeing the ramifications of this now, was when it was first put in front of the voters, there was only a quarter-cent sales tax asked for a project that probably needed a half-a-cent sales tax. And now with the recession, we're seeing the ramifications of that. And so I do not support the initiative that is being currently launched, because we've already invested in this program a lot of money. I do think that they have somebody at the helm now who's very strategic, who can figure out how to deliver as much as they can for this program.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yes, I support federal funding for SMART. I think SMART's a project that has been controversial and certainly has had some management challenges that I think are now being largely resolved. But the thing here that I think is important is, as we look to invest in sustainable infrastructure as one of the modes of putting people back to work, does this project qualify in that regard? And I think yes. One, it actually reduces traffic congestion and is putting in place infrastructure that can serve us sustainably in the long term. It also is creating over 1,000 jobs. I think by those two measures, and by the fact that we have new leadership that is taking the project forward in a much more fiscally a responsible way, that project is one that would deserve federal funding.
Thank you. Tiffany, your response?
Thank you. I would certainly support lobbying currently and have for transportation funding for SMART. We have an opportunity with the current transportation bill to work to make sure that SMART is eligible for federal funding. Additionally, I have spent my time ensuring that SMART is going to be productive and effective for our communities throughout the North Bay. On Sonoma County Transportation Authority, I helped approve $3 million of additional. I would look forward to doing that to ensure that it is available for federal funding, and we have an opportunity at this very moment to ensure that the next transportation bill is going to help SMART.
Thank you. Jared?
I support SMART as a very, very important project for this region, and I have always supported SMART, going back to being the campaign co-chair when we passed SMART in 2008. I think it's critical for our environment to take cars off the road, for our quality of life. It's critical for our economy and to create jobs, and will be a very, very important feature of this region for decades to come. So I'm anxious to get to Congress and to bring some federal money to the table, because we need that federal money to make it work. You just asked about the death penalty, and I talked about San Quentin. One of the things that we can now do, because we stopped that death row expansion, is we can finish that leg of the SMART project right into a deep water ferry terminal that will connect seamlessly to the SMART train in Larkspur, because we stopped a wasteful death row expansion at San Quentin.
Thank you. Norman?
Yeah, you know, let's be blunt. SMART has not had the money that it should have had from the get-go and throughout the process to do it right. And now people with all the best intentions are scrambling, you know, to make it work as best as possible. But there should have been a lot more money available, and federal law should have made the money available out of Washington. Let's put it in context. In an 8-year period, according to the National Priorities Project in the last decade that was studied, the federal budget went up 28%. Federal grants to states and localities went up 14%, and military spending went up 41%. We, year after year, feed more and more money, our treasure, our energies, our talents, to what Dwight Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, and then we have good projects scrambling to make ends meet, not just SMART, but thousands and thousands of potentially great green job projects that will be ecologically sound, and they're nickel and diming it compared to what is needed.
Thank you very much, Norman. So the next question is going to start with Stacy, and it is, due to the large geographical size of this new congressional district and the time required in Washington, D.C., how do you intend to have a visible presence in the entire 600-mile-long district?
I won't get much sleep. How does one answer that question? You know, it's going to be a pleasure campaigning. It is quite a large district from stem to stern, from the Golden Gate Bridge all the way up to the Oregon border. But I think the issues are so interesting and so relevant, and the people are so profound. I mean, serving the people is so profound that I will. While I may make some mistakes in Washington, they will be honest mistakes, and they will be ones that are done with a heart to serving the people. And there will be no one who works harder for her constituents and no one who cares more for her constituents. So I think it's a matter of balance and care, doing the work that needs to be done in Washington and being in conversation with as many people as possible throughout this district. And we've started that in our campaign process. So we launched our campaign with a telephone town hall that reached out to over 10,000 voters across this district. I think there are unique technologies and digital means of reaching out and to be in dialogue so that we can collectively be talking about issues, what things are on your mind, what you care about, and make sure that I'm taking those to Washington. We'll be demonstrating that throughout the campaign, and certainly want to take that into office. I think a set of extraordinary citizens who are part of a mobilization to take our message to Washington is what it will take to make the change that's required.
Thank you, Stacy. Tiffany, your response.
Thank you. I am fortunate that my children are now 21 and 22, and so I have a lot of time on my hands to be able to be present for meeting the needs of this new district. I have been able to travel in this district, and it is an incredibly vast and beautiful district, and I look forward to being in it. In order to maintain the consistency that this district needs, we've got to keep the offices open that are currently open now and keep the folks that are there working in those offices if they're willing and able. It's going to be tough to get up there, but I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to being present. One of the things that I'm known for in this region is showing up. I believe showing up and being present for people is very important. It gives you the opportunity to listen and to hear the concerns. And so I'm looking very forward to spending a great deal of time throughout the district.
Thank you. Jared?
Gabe, the short answer is somebody that's represented a pretty large assembly district the last 5 years that includes 2 different counties, is you work hard. You get out to visit small businesses, you get out to visit schools, you get out and kick the dirt on farms and ranches, and you develop a sense of trust and connection with the district that you represent and serve. When I was elected in 2006, I think there was a little bit of skepticism in southern Sonoma County that someone from Marin would be that authentically connected with Sonoma County, but I'm proud to say that through a lot of hard work, I think that we've put those concerns to rest. I'm proud that I am endorsed by elected officials and community leaders throughout the district that I currently serve, and I am excited to represent this new coastal district. Yes, the fact that they have some of the best fishing in the state of California is part of my enthusiasm to represent the North Coast, but it's more than that. I genuinely enjoy and connect with this diverse and unique, iconic piece of California, and I'm excited to represent it.
Thank you. Norman, your response.
Yeah, I've gotten to know just a lot of people already up on the North Coast, have car, will travel. I mean, that is part of the job, and it's essential to go and visit with as many folks as possible. When it comes to the discussion of using broadband, and particularly with people in rural areas, to connect to elected officials, I have a real concern. If we're asking people to ante up a lot of their personal funds, often when they are low or moderate income, and you've got to pay an outfit like Comcast to communicate with your elected representatives, that's wrong. We shouldn't have a price on participation in the electoral process. And I think it's absolutely crucial that when we look at not only broadband policy, but all sorts of communications policies out of Washington in general, we always keep in mind the way in which there is a de facto economic apartheid in terms of how people are able to participate. And sometimes the more wealthy individuals lose track of the fact that for some people paying $50 or $60 or $80 or $100 for cable, for broadband, that's too much money for them, and we've got to make not a single penny a requirement for being full participants in the electoral process.
Thank you, Norman. Susan?
Yes, I actually am not just starting to venture into Mendocino, Humboldt, and North counties. I have family members there, so I have a key to the front door and a place to stay when I'm there, and have a connection with community in those areas. I think there is a lot of concern north of Sonoma that somebody from this part of the district might not pay attention, but I am happily single, and all of my children are grown and gone, and so when I'm not in Washington, D.C., this whole district will be my home. And I'm fortunate because I have family in the district too, and they will certainly hold my feet to the fire on making sure that I show up. I do agree that being physically present is an important part of being a good public servant. The tools of technology are important, and there are people, a lot of people, that have the technology to be able to communicate through Skype or video conferencing. I use that in some of my conferencing with the National Association of Counties, but the physical presence is important.
Thank you very much. Next question, we'll start with Tiffany. The North Bay is not only home to thousands of small businesses, but dozens of large companies employing hundreds or even thousands of workers. What concrete actions will you take to ensure that existing businesses stay in the North Bay and that entrepreneurs have the tools they need to succeed?
Thank you. Here in Petaluma, we've been addressing these issues through an economic development strategy and hiring an economic development director. We've been able to identify which businesses are the greatest and which businesses are emerging. Focusing on retaining the businesses that we have is an important factor in continuing our economic development. by ensuring that the needs of those just growing businesses that are struggling to reach that new level has been something that Petaluma has been working on, and identifying those issues that are keeping them from growing, as well as identifying the issues of the smallest of the businesses and keeping those afloat, and making sure that they have people that are patronizing their businesses and supporting those local businesses are all key factors in addressing local economic growth.
Thank you. Chaired?
One of the things that we're still very, very good at in California, and especially here in the North Bay, is promoting innovation. We continue to have venture capital flowing into Northern California. We have lots of business startups, lots of things that we can be excited about, but then it begins to break down when we create these wonderful ideas and these new startup companies. And so that's one of the most important things I think we can work on. Right now, the biggest challenge to small business is having access to capital. And that's something that's been frustrating to me as a state legislator, because my toolbox has been fairly limited in the ability to try to improve lending and improve access to capital for small businesses. But at the federal level, there's lots of things you can do through the SBA program, through things like an infrastructure bank that I was very pleased to see President Obama put in the American Jobs Act, and any number of other policies to promote lending, which in turn will enable small businesses to do what they do so well, which is to create jobs. But beyond that, we're going to have to look at a bunch of different policies. We have to train people better through our education system. We're going to need fair trade agreements so we have access to other markets, but we're not having incentives that send jobs overseas. And it's going to require a very close look at many, many federal policies.
Thank you. Norman?
Yeah, I repeatedly say that I don't believe in trickle-down economics. I don't believe in trickle-down job creation. To just depend on these huge outfits to come in and create good jobs is often mistaken, and often we have large corporations in the community that have failed to provide a living wage. We need to fight for a real living wage and not tell people you make $7.50 or $8 an hour, so problem solved. It's a rather severe, almost a sad joke, but a very vicious one, to tell working and wannabe working people, we're going to train you for jobs that don't exist. You know, we need a massive federal jobs program to put people to work. And when it gets down to the race to the bottom, firms that are either in our communities trying to expand once they have a foothold or bring in new ones like Target and Walmart, those are outfits that are absolutely hostile to the well-being of workers, to get adequate health care, to get a decent wage. So when we support and fight for local businesses, as we must do, we've got to be willing to challenge the big threats coming to those local businesses from the big national chain, big box stores.
Thank you. Susan?
Well, about 80% of our businesses are small businesses, and they are struggling right now. The banks are holding on to a lot of resource. The taxpayers bailed out the mortgage industry and the banking industry in the hopes that the funds would be opened and released to our small businesses. I have family members that are struggling right now, and part of it is the regulatory challenges. There are a lot of rules and regulations that are very costly for our small business owners. There's a pizza shop right here in Petaluma that is dealing with double dipping from state taxing through the Board of Equalization to ensure that he will pay his taxes on time, even though he's had a history of always paying his taxes on time. I think we need to make it easier for our businesses to survive. The banks need to open up their pocketbooks and start reinvesting back into our community, and we need to also value the fact that our public jobs are also very good jobs as well.
Thank you. Stacy?
So I think there's kind of three key areas that are important. The first, both for large business and small business, and that the first is the regulatory environment. It's not that we need to be lightweight or we need to sort of reduce our standards, but we need to be more transparent. And right now we have a very, very garbled set of regulations that govern our business environment that make it difficult for new businesses to take root and for those that operate to do it effectively. So I think we do need some regulatory reform. The second area, and these sort of is specifically for small business, The economic recovery will be fueled by small business. It is the engine of economic growth. So we need innovation support for small business. I think we need an incubator in every county. We need to have that tied to our various educational institutions, and we need to have resources and models that are ones like I've been working on at UC Berkeley and have proven with dozens and dozens of startup companies that we've actually spun out of the UC system or implemented here within the local Northern California economy, creating thousands of jobs. Those models are known and they can be implemented across our district. The third piece, I think, is education, and it's really, really key that our youth be trained in this very fast-paced, dynamic, hyper-connected, new innovation environment to compete, that we're helping them be versatile and trained, college-ready, and equipped to be the workforce of the future, and that's going to be very important for small and large business.
Thank you. Chair, this next one's for you, and we only have one more after this. So, do you see organized labor as a help, a hindrance, or inconsequential to national economic recovery? Please explain.
Well, when I think of sorry, there's my button. When I think of organized labor, I think of the working people of this country, and they're absolutely essential to economic recovery. So I think that's an easy question. It has troubled me that in this terribly polarized political climate, we have seen the workers of America become scapegoats, frankly, to a political ideology that I do not particularly subscribe to. So I think workers are essential. I think organized labor plays a very, very important role in protecting the middle class and standing up for working conditions. We've seen that time and time again in the history of our country, and I think they have a very important role to play today as well.
Thank you. Norman?
I'm a longtime union member, UAW, Local 1981, National Writers Union. One of the notable things is that when labor takes a hit again and again, for instance, the White House promised to fight for an Employee Free Choice Act, and then put it on the back burner and the side burner, and then threw it off the stovetop. And the silence that we've had from so many prominent Democrats is really, I think, rather disturbing. I think we need to be willing and able to fight for the rights of workers, and if that means pushing a president of our own party, so be it. We've seen the consequences of just tamping down our righteous fight for the rights of working people, and the Employee Free Choice Act is a good example. I was out with California Nurses Association as a speaker demanding 3 years ago that Dianne Feinstein support Employee Free Choice Act. She never got around to it. I was on the record fighting for defeat of the October 2008 bailout for the Wall Street banks. I had a big piece in the Marin IJ the first day of October. You can look back and search for others running who fought the big bank bailouts that did nothing for liquidity, for homeowners to be able to keep their homes, or for loans to small businesses. Did nothing but enrich Wall Street.
Thank you. Susan?
Without labor, children would still be working in sweatshops, and the work conditions would be deplorable. We saw that a century ago, and in fact, in some areas, we are still seeing some of those activities. I have been a member of CNA. I was a labor organizer at UCSF. I helped to negotiate the first shop deal, and we had a good relationship with management. Labor and management worked together, mostly to come up with the work rules around not having nurses standing on their feet for 24 hours in a surgical suite with an unconscious person under anesthesia under their sharp object. Those are the types of issues that labor helps to negotiate and to bring across. It's not just about salaries and benefits. There are other issues related to work. More than 300 firefighters ran into the Twin Towers to rescue people that died. And they were heroes. And the change in 10 years to the rhetoric now that demonizes our labor is really shocking to me.
Thank you. Stacy?
Our economy is dependent on labor. What do we have except our workforce? And the collective bargaining power that labor brings is essential for us to make sure that we're putting in place workers' rights, the right working conditions, and that we're upholding things like not only labor standards but environmental standards. I think labor is what pushes the envelope forward for us, and that labor working with management is going to be absolutely critical and key for our economic recovery. So it can't hinder, it can only help. We need labor to be part of the solution and to be working together with all of the aspects of our economic system in order to make sure this recovery happens.
Tiffany, your response?
I have a family background in labor. My grandfather was a plumber pipe fitter. My stepfather worked for the state of California. My brother is a police officer, and my cousin is a firefighter. I understand the importance of labor. My grandmother would have been destitute without her post-survivor benefits. She had the ability to have pension and health care at the end of her life during a fatal illness because of labor. We need an Employee Free Choice Act. We need project labor agreements. Blue-collar workers are seeing a 14.1% unemployment rate right now. And in the North Bay, some segments like building and trades are at a 30% unemployment rate. It is vital that labor continue to have someone that is strongly a proponent and will fight for and continue to fight for working families. And as your next Congresswoman, I will continue to do that.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I misjudged the time on that last question. So we'll go ahead and go to the closing statements. And Norman, you'll start for us. Again, 90 seconds for the closing statements for each candidate.
Yeah, there's sort of a myth that principles are all well and good, but they can't really guide political campaigns or political policy. In fact, all of the progress we can be proud of in our country is a result of people pursuing principle, be willing to fight for it. And our campaign for Congress, and you can get details at solomonforcongress.com, is predicated on principle as strategy. The myth is, hey, you can't raise money that you need if you don't get in the trough with corporate power and corporate contributions. I'm so proud that we're so far above now, $200,000, not a penny from corporate PACs, and it's going to stay that way. We can have a different society, and we have the possibility to create the nucleus of that society in terms of how we organize and how we function and sticking with principles day by day. I do want to say that preaching around the world will not get it done if we don't change our own policies at home and abroad. I support, between Palestinians and Israelis, a two-state solution. I always have. And at the same time, when we preach to them that they shouldn't solve their problems with violence, we've got to be real about that ourselves. Just telling them how they should behave and then trying to work our way in the world with violence to the Pentagon, that's not going to be successful in the long run. Blowback and worse occurs as a result. Speaking of violence, I want to say that support for nuclear power is absolutely the wrong way to go. My campaign is unequivocally against nuclear power. Its companion role with nuclear weapons is well established. I invite you to be part of the campaign. I see it's time for me to end speaking again. I'm looking forward to working with you, and I hope you'll visit us at solomonforcongress.com. And thanks to everybody for being here today.
Thank you, Norman. Susan.
Thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion with you tonight. Our communities in our country are facing some really complicated and difficult challenges, and we need to get back to the place of talking to each other and solving those problems. As a nurse and as a healer, as somebody who has worked in healthcare and who is bringing a vision for healthy planet, healthy communities in all of my policy decisions as a locally elected, and which I hope to bring when elected to Congress, I think that it's really going to be important to have that particular perspective. There are many good Democrats in this race, and you're not going to hear a lot of differences in some of the issues. As you've heard here tonight, I think there's a lot of similarities in the policy, but the lens with which we have used our professional careers, the vision that we have in terms of our policies, comes from our lived experiences. And as a nurse and as a healer, my thoughts are that Washington has a sickness right now, and who better to send than a nurse? to heal it. And so I'm hoping that you will agree. I think the only way we're going to solve these problems, no one of us alone is going to do this. We will need community. We will need the people that put us to Washington, D.C. to work with us to solve these problems. No problem is too big or too small to tackle. I've lived that at local government level, trying to deal with the issues that in our communities, and I hope you will visit SusanAdamsForCongress.com to see more about my race.
Thank you very much. Stacy?
I'm Stacy Lawson, and I'm seeking your vote to be your next Congresswoman. My experience in job creation and education and social justice are all highly relevant to the issues of our day. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm the only person in this race who has created thousands of jobs, not by voting for them, but by literally rolling up my sleeves, working with entrepreneurs, creating small business, sustaining, funding, supporting, and being in the trenches with them to create jobs for people who are now employed, thousands of them in the Northern California economy. I plan to bring that same experience and track record and the many decades of care to this district to bring forth those solutions in Washington. I don't come from a Sacramento or Washington background. I think we have some broken things that we need to fix, and we need new leadership, new visionary, innovative leadership to step into Washington from outside the political sphere in order to fix our current problems. So I'm running both to put America back to work and to defend the social contract that is what has made our democracy strong, to bring both compassion and care and strength to Washington. And I look forward to being in dialogue with you over the course of this campaign, to having you all involved with our activities, and to hearing your issues, and to serving you in Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stacy. Tiffany, your response or your closing statement?
Thank you. This GOP majority in Congress is using our tough economy to repeal 100 years of progress. Rather than address the inequities of our tax system, this Congress would cut the very programs that provide services to our most vulnerable. Programs like Social Security, Veterans Administration, health care reform, and vital services that save lives. There is a war on the middle class. China is spending 9% of its GDP on infrastructure, Europe 5%, and the US only 2%. We need to invest in America again by bringing home our troops, passing the transportation bill, an energy independence bill, and a jobs bill that reinvests in our aging infrastructure while reducing our dependence on oil and coal. As the only elected progressive in this race, I have the vision, heart, and experience to meet the needs of our new North Coast District as your next Congresswoman. I will continue the work of fostering innovation and job creation, protecting the working class and living wages, preparing our students with a 21st century education, and really protecting our water, air, and land, like fighting against the Dutra asphalt plant. I will continue to be a voice for justice and protecting our quality of life and the rights we have struggled for so long. Today, I need your help to get there. We need volunteers helping on the campaign, and of course, we need to fund the cost of getting out into this vast and beautiful district. I ask for your vote and your bold contribution to this campaign so that I can help get America working again. Please visit Tiffany Renee for Congress and join Team TIFF and make a $5 contribution to our campaign to keep this seat in the hands of a strong Democratic Congresswoman.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Jared, your closing?
Thank you, Gabe. Whether you are at the southern end of this spectacular, huge, diverse district or the North Coast, 2012 is going to be a big year, a year with big shoes to fill for a new member of Congress, a year with a very, very important choice for you as voters, because the person we send to Washington to represent us could very well represent us for many years to come. I hope that I've conveyed to you tonight that my campaign is a bit different, that I'm not just talking with you about things I promised to do after I'm elected, but I'm also talking to you about things that I actually have done, including overcoming a lot of gridlock and dysfunction in Sacramento the past 5 years to pass more than 50 pieces of successful legislation that are actually doing things, improving our fisheries and our rivers, helping prevent oil spills, spurring innovation and job creation, promoting energy independence, keeping our state parks open. I'm very proud of the work that I've done on a wide range of issues. And as I seek your support for Congress, You don't have to just take my word for it that I will go to Washington and work hard to deliver results on your behalf. Look to the people you trust. I'm very proud that the people I have worked with, local government leaders, community leaders all over this district, environmental organizations, labor groups, are endorsing my campaign. We're announcing major new endorsements each week, and I hope you will consider joining my campaign and go to my website, www.jaredhuffman.com, sign up, be part of my online campaign community, and I look forward to representing you in Congress. Thank you for this event tonight.
Thank you all very much for participating in this evening, and thank you again to our media partners. Let's give them all a round of applause. So, thank you to our media partners tonight, Petaluma Community Access. This was aired live on Channel 27 and will air repeatedly on that station, as well as our radio partner, KSRO 1350 AM. Thank you all very much, and have a good night.